Hello everyone and a very warm welcome to Canva's Design for Change Week. My name is Enza and I'll be hosting our session today. In this session, we are looking at first impressions, engaging deliveries and clear communication. So we're joined today by two of our Canva team members. We're joined by Paul Thompson, who's a software engineer, and Jessie Walker, a product manager working at Canva. So Paul and Jessie will be helping us to present well for any occasion, which is a very important skill. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Paul and Jessie to begin.
Hey everyone, welcome to our workshop, Presenting Well for Any Occasion. We're really excited to have currently, well, last time I checked, there were about 250 people in the webinar, 219 at the moment. So let's try to make quadruple digits by the end of it, hopefully. So before we begin, in the spirit of reconciliation, Canva acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So welcome to our workshop. Joining me today is my friend Paul. Hey Paul.
Hey, so I'm Paul, software engineer at Canva. I find myself here with no real background in speaking. I've not come from like doing drama or anything like that. I think my biggest claim to fame on getting up in front of people, a lot of my life growing up was playing the electric ukulele at a school assembly.
Yeah, you can actually see his video on YouTube if you search for "Show Me a Sign." And yeah, my name's Jessie. I'm a product manager at Canva, so I sort of decide what people like Paul will build. I have done a little bit of music and drama throughout my life, but yeah, I don't have any formal qualification as like a public speaker or anything. So I guess we'll start today with a quote by my friend on the weekend who said, "Why are you qualified to give a talk on how to be a good presenter?" Which I thought was a reasonable question for him to ask, given that I didn't train in this. And so I thought we'd just start by sort of saying, well, we're not, but anyone can be a good presenter if they just follow some simple steps, which is what we're here to talk about. But to prove to you that Paul and I, in fact, do present in front of several hundred people, not just virtually, here are some examples of the sort of public speaking that we've done at Canva. So we have these events called season openers, which is just a fancy way of saying quarterly business update. And Paul and I have hosted a few of those things among like trivia nights, comedy nights that didn't go so well. And so this workshop was sort of developed as an internal tool at Canva for us, basically just to share sort of some of the tips that we've really just like learned ourselves when it comes to getting up on stage in front of people and presenting. But it'd be good if we could maybe just have a quick look at who you are, because yeah, we don't actually, we can't see you. So maybe Paul, if we just open the chat and say hi.
Yeah, so I'm just having a look through the chat to see we've got people coming in from all over the place. We really like to usually start our sessions by getting to have a chat with people. So, through Zoom, it's really nice that everyone's introduced themselves. People coming in from Manila in India and Hawaii, multiple people from Hawaii, which sounds a lot better right now than I've got the coldest office in the world right now. There's no sun coming through. Vancouver, I think that's going to be potentially colder than me.
Maybe not right now.
We've got some people from Melbourne, so I was going to say, shout out to our people from Melbourne. Hope you're doing okay.
Hey, let's try something. We have this cool thing called live audience tools on Canva. So if you go to canva.live and enter that code, this is the first time we've done this while presenting, so let's see how it goes. Then you'll actually be able to type your name if you want and type like a question or just like say who you are, and then we'll see it appear here. So throughout the presentation today, we might bring this up intermittently and see if we can engage with you a little bit, because it's otherwise quite virtual.
Yeah, awesome. Well, while we'll leave that up, we might continue on as well. So a little bit about, I guess, why we're here. We kind of assume we're here because there's a lot of people who probably want to do maybe a bit more of this, getting up in front of people with a bit of a microphone to present, maybe in a really big setting or maybe not. But a lot of people tell us they feel maybe a little bit like this when they're about to go present for the first time, or even just like at a big event. And we want people to feel maybe a little bit more like this, like you've just won an Oscar for doing such a damn good job. And so that's really what we're hoping to get out of today.
That's right. Cool. Hey, so we do have a couple of people who have successfully started using our Canva Live tool, which is pretty cool actually, because this is literally the first time I've used it with real people. So it's good to see that it hasn't crashed yet. Yeah, how do we get there? So I might just close this for the moment and I'll open it up every now and then. Hello, everyone. Hi, Anonymous, ×4. So how do we get there? Well, Paul and I, as we said, we've, in doing quite a bit of speaking just at Canva, have figured out that the way that we do it is by following a really simple set of processes. So firstly, preparing, secondly, practicing a hell of a lot, and then finally, the actual art of presenting. And so that's what we're going to go through today. And we hope that at the end of the session, you'll go away with 3 sort of key lessons. So firstly, presenting is about crafting a good message and telling a good story. The second thing is that with enough preparation and practice, anyone can be a natural. So we really want to dispel this myth that like people are just natural presenters and they don't have to practice at all, because everyone practices for a presentation and they are always prepared. And then finally, even the most experienced presenters get nervous and mess up. So let's get straight into it. So Paul, what are some examples of presenting?
Yeah, one of the things that we wanted to kick off with is a lot of people kind of have a event or a thing that they think about when they think about presenting, but it's actually really common that you have an opportunity to do so. So we've got a couple of examples. They could range from something that's relatively important, but it's amongst people you know and love, like giving a speech at a friend's wedding. It could be really vital, something like pitching a fundraising idea, but it also could be just with your team at the end of a week, talking about what kind of stuff you've been up to and how it's been affecting you, or just something fun like emceeing a trivia night. But the idea is that there's really a hell of a lot of opportunities to present that are around us all the time, and it's a really good thing to do when you're trying to improve, is to look out for these smaller ones that you can do and build into the bigger ones so you've got that confidence.
Yeah, so putting your hand up for opportunities to present is definitely a huge part of getting better at it, because if you only see presenting as getting up on stage in front of 1,000 people, then of course it's always going to seem scary. But giving a birthday card to a friend and making a little speech at the party, like that's also presenting, and that's a good way to practice. So why do it? Well, Paul and I got into presenting at work specifically for a few reasons, because it's good to step outside your comfort zone. People always say that you should do one thing every day that scares you a bit, and I think presenting is a good example of that. Most of the time when you're presenting, the stakes are actually pretty low. Like I think people sort of catastrophize when they think about presenting, and they think about all the things that can go wrong. But most of the time, people are on your side, and most of the time, if it does go wrong, it just doesn't really matter. And then finally, it is a really good way of building credibility and confidence. So especially in a work setting, if you present often and people sort of become familiar with your face, then it's a good way of building a bit of a sort of profile at work, and also just building some confidence.
When we ran this at Canva, one of the first things we did was put back a 1-question survey, which was, what is holding you back from being a good presenter? And the kind of answers we got back were really significantly grouped. If we take a look at it, there are 45% of people who just said they were scared of being in front of a crowd, while a bunch of other people just were nervous about relative things of their content, or they're unsure about how to deliver it or what even to say. And some people were worried about confidence as well. So you can see general themes of nervousness coming up. Some people didn't get the opportunity or plain didn't want to, but it appears that 5% of people who came to our workshop were already doing just fine. So evidently didn't need to be there. Yeah, so that means we'll assume about 15 people here today. If that's about 5%, they're already absolutely nailing it. So we'd love to see you here. You can feel free to answer any questions in chat. But once we identified this, we're really on to our first phase of the system. So that is preparation.
That's right. And before we jump into it, why don't we use this handy little tool again? And let's see if people would like to share their answer to this question that we just saw, which is, what is the main thing holding you back from being a good presenter? So what sorts of things do you find stop you from getting up on stage and feeling as comfortable as you possibly can? So I'll just leave this open as we sort of carry on.
I think you want to scroll to the top, Jesse.
Top, eh? Oh, yeah,
Yep.
that makes a lot more sense. Yeah.
There we go. Nothing stops me. There we go. We've got our 5%. Love to see it.
Perfect. My brain stops working. I get too nervous. Yes, that you'll actually probably see during this presentation that our brains stop working intermittently as well. Yeah, unrealistic expectations of complete disaster from Tia. Yeah, it's, as I said before, like we definitely catastrophize. And sometimes it takes something going wrong for us to realize that the worst case scenario isn't actually that bad. Perfectionism, that's another one. Being shy, not confident. So we'll go through these things, particularly towards the end of this workshop, but it's good to see that, yeah, a lot of people sort of feel the same sense of anxiety and fear when presenting. So let's jump straight into preparation. We'll go through 4 sort of areas in terms of preparation for presenting. So a bit about the why it's important to prepare, some of the ways in which we prepare, how much preparation we actually do depending on the occasion, and of course when we start presenting. So just to start with the why. So why is it important to prepare? Well, it's important to prepare because behind every really good presentation is a ton of preparation. I think we sort of have this impression that when we see someone who gave a really good presentation, that they just sort of got up on stage and winged it. And Paul and I certainly have experienced this at work when we host events. And afterwards, people come up to us and say, well, like, did you improvise all of that? Or how did you make so many jokes on the spot? And almost every time we say, what are you talking about? That was like a month of work. Like there's a lot of preparation. And so we kind of really want to get across this message that a good presentation is never as spontaneous as it seems. Now, that's not to say there's no spontaneity, but preparation is a huge part of that.
Yeah, it's so true. But you don't want to necessarily spend a month on your friend's birthday card or anything like that. So the first thing that we do when we get together, when we're doing something new together, is take a little bit of a measure of the audience and the impact that we're trying to deliver. And this is kind of vital because when you want to have a look at your audience and impact, you're going to get a sense of the scale of the thing. So we kind of can graph this in some ways. So you can see that your events, as they go up to the top and right, are going to require a bit more work to get in it. You can have a toast at a dinner party with about 10 minutes thinking behind the scenes. Meanwhile, if you're delivering maybe a training workshop to a bunch of non-for-profits, you definitely want to have been started a few weeks earlier. So when you deliver your lines, you're confident and you're ready to go, because that way you can deliver the impact you're looking for to the big audience that you've got. But most critically is when you've identified this is to get started early. It's going to be really good for making sure that your brain's just confident and calm with the kind of information that you're passing across. But if you get started late, you might find yourself just a bit flustered the entire time. So yeah, early is always better for these kind of things.
So a great example of this is actually the current workshop. So when Paul and I first agreed to it, we were like, yeah, sure, sounds great. And then we found out there were heaps and heaps of people attending, and we were really busy with other stuff. And so we started working on it like late last week, and I was stressing out. And it's a great example of what not to do, because it's actually way better to like work really hard on something early on. And as Paul said, like your brain actually does a lot of the subconscious, your subconscious actually does a lot of the work in the background, so that when you really get started on it, a lot of the work is already done. But what do we mean by preparation? So when we talk about preparation, essentially we mean all of the stuff that comes before the presentation itself and before practicing it, that is going to set you up for success. So we split it up into 4 main areas. Firstly, you need to identify the purpose of your presentation and the audience, so who you're presenting for. You really need to try to define one key message in the presentation, so that the people who attend have like a key takeaway. The third thing is you need to write a really solid outline. So that's basically going to act as like your map for the presentation, and a skeleton for your slides, which if you are creating will come as a 4th step. So let's just go into a fictional example. Paul, do you play any sports?
I play one sport of a semi-professional ultimate frisbee player, aka the coolest sport you can play.
Great. Yeah, I think actually it is literally the coolest sport you can play. So imagine that Paul runs an ultimate frisbee organization and he needs to pitch to some local businesses for sponsorship. Without their help, his frisbee dreams may never take off. So we'll look at this example and show you how we apply this framework to that. So starting with purpose and audience.
So the first thing that I'm going to want to do is, if I'm trying to get some help for my Frisbee organization, is have a think about the purpose that I'm trying to get across. So namely, in this case, I'm probably trying to maybe get some money to help out my organization, but I also have to figure out who I'm going to talk to. So maybe in this case, I'm looking for a bit of money for my Frisbee organization, and I'm going to go talk to local businesses. And the first thing that I've got to think about there is my purpose has to come across in a way that is clear. So I need to say that I need sponsorship. It can't just be entertaining. I'm not there just to make someone laugh, but the critical point is to get the critical information, so that I need sponsorship, how much I need, and what it'll be used for. But at the same time, I have to understand exactly who I'm talking to. So if I'm talking to small, medium businesses, I need to be very clear about clarity amongst the efficiency of the use of it, how it's going to pay back to them. And this is kind of the information that may not be so relevant if you're just talking to maybe a government organization versus a friend or a business that you run internally. So it's critical that you identify these features, because it's going to adjust the type of content that you create at the end of the day. And once you've got this kind of figured out, it's time for you to go and actually develop a key message around those kind of skeletons that you've just created.
Yeah. So I guess just to reiterate Paul's points, like a good example of changing your presentation based on the purpose and the audience. So last year we did this big public event for about 800 people, and Paul and I had been asked to MC it. And when we first were asked to MC it, we understood that it would be an internal event. And so we started developing content based on basically performing for our colleagues. And then we found out that journalists and investors and other members of the community would be there. And so the audience sort of changed a little bit. So we had to adjust our content. And all the while, the purpose was to entertain. So we mostly made it quite absurd. But of course, if our purpose had been to inform or to solicit donations, we would have created a very different presentation. So yeah, onto the key message. So it's really important to have like one key message in your presentation or in whatever sort of public speaking you're delivering. So in the example of the Ultimate Frisbee tournament, Paul, your key message might be something like,
I need your money for my Ultimate Frisbee tournament, or it's never going to see the light of day.
Cool. So that's technically a key message. It's not the best one. So let's have a think about how we find a key message in a presentation. So we sort of take a 3-step approach. You'll notice we like 3-step approaches, and they usually all start with the same letter. So in this case, it's idea. So you take an idea. In this case, it is Paul needs money for his Ultimate Frisbee tournament. You kind of interrogate it or investigate it. So like you really pick it apart. And this is all part of that like initial outline phase. And then you iterate on that. So like, don't settle for the first thing you come up with. It's like writing an essay at uni, or like writing, a good report, at work. You shouldn't just sort of write it and then leave it. You really need to iterate on it. So let's say that we start with the idea, okay, Ultimate Frisbee is an accessible all ages sport. Sport gives kids and adults a fun way to stay healthy. And of course, a healthy community is a happy community. And since we're pitching to businesses, let's tell them that a happy community is good for business. Or we can look at it from a different angle. So Ultimate Frisbee is a fun new sport. Sport creates a sense of community. By contributing to sport, local businesses can assist in creating a sense of community. And of course, members of the community favor businesses that give back. So what we're sort of doing here is like drilling into a particular area of the topic and trying to kind of extract like the most engaging and the most kind of meaningful message we can. And so we go from that fairly poor attempt at a key message to something more like,
I want to promote a fun and accessible way for members of our community to stay healthy. And I'd love your help in doing that. In doing so, you'll be giving back to the community, and this will be good for business overall. Now, in doing so, I've been able to say this key message, which is that one takeaway that I really hope they have at the end of the day. But if I just say that, they might not have it stick in their heads. It's important for me to now fit that key message into the entire presentation by beginning my outline. Now, the outline is one of the most critical parts of what we do in our planning sessions. And for some of what we have created in the past, creating our outline has been the majority of the work that we've put into it. It's kind of like a map. And we kind of say that because as it starts, it's an empty piece of paper and you just start putting information in. And over time, you end up with a really structured form of your presentation, which fills you with confidence, knowing how to get from the start to the end. So the way we go about doing it is just by brain dumping everything we can think of at the start. So this might just be putting down the worst ideas you've ever thought of, or you may have just cottoned on to the best idea that you're going to come up with all day. And what we find really useful is to workshop with someone else while doing this phase of brainstorming. That includes if you're doing a presentation all by yourself. It's a really good way to just get a really quick measure of if what you're saying is making sense. If you're trying to make a joke, is it funny to at least one other person? And is the story coherent over time? Because at the end of the day, when you finish creating your outline, you've almost created a bit of a mini story in it. And that story should lead the person watching your presentation throughout to see your key message at the end of the day. And so this could be an example of an outline that we'd use in the event we were pitching to small businesses about the Ultimate Frisbee Foundation that I've been creating. And it leads that person pretty clearly through the story and ends with the key message that we've been looking for. And we do this for everything, actually, including this talk today. We've got about a 15-page outline that has allowed us to be able to talk through the slides as well as be able to understand easy things like when I'm talking and Jesse's talking. It makes it really easy as a map to guide us through the entire presentation. And it sets you up really well. Now? Yeah. Oh, well, let's check. It sets you up really well for the next part, which is creating your slides.
Perfect. Yeah. So as Paul mentioned, the outline is sort of like this map of how you're going to get from the start of your story to the end of your story and how you fill in all the details. And it acts as a really important reference point when you're creating your slides, if you're doing a presentation that requires slides. So we'll just touch a little bit on slides. We won't spend too much time on it because I think there's definitely a lot of literature by much more qualified people on this. But we just want to sort of touch on what slides are for, and at least one do and at least one don't. So yeah, slides, it's really important to keep in mind that they're just a visual communication tool. So they should never be used as basically a script or the entire contents of your presentation that you just read off. People should, when they see your slides, sort of further understand what you're saying out loud, and the slides should really complement that. So the spoken part and the written part of your presentation kind of act together. And then finally, they act as a reference point throughout the presentation. So, people's interest and attention certainly waxes and wanes when they're listening to someone give a presentation, and having the slides up there can quite literally just give them something to look at when they've sort of zoned out for a bit, and then they look back and they go, oh, okay, cool, this is what we're up to. Good slides, tend to be punchy. They light on the text. They'll sort of favor graphics. Obviously, more relevant graphics are better versus bad slides, which are very text heavy. They are not so punchy, and they might use graphics that are either too small or might be irrelevant. But as I said, we won't go into too much detail here because there's just so much stuff written on this. But actually, Canva is a really good tool to use when creating presentations. It's so funny because working at Canva, obviously we only ever use Canva for presentations. We don't use any other tools. And every now and then I see a presentation that's created on Google Slides, and the information is there, but it just it feels so much more stale. And I think having a captivating visual component to your presentation, it just really goes a long way. So that brings us to the next part of the workshop, which is practice with an S, because we use UK English here.
Well, one of the things when we say practice is kind of people often when we're in a physical workshop look at us yeah, of course, why are you even talking about this? But when we talk about practice, we first of all want to make people understand why you do it, then a little bit about how you do it. So to start off with why practice? First of all, it's really good to say your points out loud. And what we even mean by this is sometimes, you can run through your presentation, saying it in your head, and that might sound fine in your head, but as soon as you say it out loud, it's going to maybe struggle to come out of your throat. The words might not go together, or it might sound jarring. It's also a really good time, the first time, that you get to check that what you're saying and your slides are complementing each other really well. As Jesse pointed out, slides are really meant to be complementary to what you're saying. And so if you've got a slide that just slows you down or isn't acting as a punctuation point, the first time you're really going to find that out is when you try to give it a run through. And finally, you're going to get used to the sound of your own voice. And that's so critical when things go wrong. Is if something goes wrong and you've never run through a presentation before, it's so much harder to rescue yourself than it is if you're really used to what you're talking about at the time. And so by getting all this done, by speaking it out loud, it's going to be pretty vital to ensuring that you have a good time. But most critically of all is that practice isn't the final step. It's not the final step in the drafting process in any way, shape, or form. It's actually just the beginning of the feedback loop. And what we mean by this is in every stage of creating our outline, to creating our slides, to finally practicing, we constantly go back to the prior stage with the learning that we've taken from that one. So we might write our outline and try put it in some slides and find that it just doesn't work together. And that's a good time to take us back to our outline and fix that up. And the same goes with practice. When you run through it for the first time, it's usually the time you'll have the most feedback to give to your slides and your original outline. And this doesn't just happen once. We'll usually continually update every single piece of our outline, slides, and our overall delivery almost every time we run through it, to the point that they're very, very minor adjustments. But the first few times, this should be quite a big process, especially for an important presentation, because you want to make sure every part is working in unison. So most critically is taking that feedback loop and really bringing it together to affect all parts of your presentation, not just how you're saying it.
Yeah, so that's a little bit about why practicing is so important, and we hope that that has become very clear. So now let's talk a bit more about how we practice. So I'm just speaking from experience here. Of course, there are many ways of practicing for a presentation, but the way that I tend to do it is I'll actually just start like in front of my computer. So again, if I'm using slides, I have the slides up and I'll like literally just click through and I'll be speaking saying my presentation out loud, because as Paul said, it kind of helps to gauge the cues of the presentation, make sure that I kind of hit the next button at the right moment. And it also helps me get used to the sound of my own voice. It's a really good idea to practice with someone else, so a partner or a colleague or a friend. If you're presenting to someone who doesn't have context on what you're talking about, it's even better, because then they can sort of tell you if you're being too technical or if the way that you're delivering it actually makes sense. And it's sort of, it's a good way to get that immediate feedback on your presentation style. And this is something that I do. I actually practice a lot just like on my own. So if I'm like out for a walk or like, I don't know, doing house chores or something, I'll sort of run through my presentation in my head. Like I'll picture the slides, or if I don't have slides, I'll just sort of remember the points, and then I'll literally just say it out loud. And that's really important in, again, getting used to the sound of your own voice and kind of formulating your ideas really clearly.
Jesse, do you want to check on Canva Live and see if we can get a couple of other ways that, you know, how do other people find a useful way to practice? Like, does anyone else have a different way that they use for really solid practice?
Cool. So there are, in front of the mirror. Yeah, that's actually, that's, I was thinking of including that, except that I never do it. But some people have told me that they do that. And I think, it's a really good
recording.
Way to do it.
Recording's a great one. Jesse and I actually did record ourselves for our big one in front of the media for the first time. We actually put a phone down, and I have hours of recording of us just going back through and through to make sure it works well.
Yeah, totally. Recording is actually amazing. I mean, if you can sort of push through like the dread of hearing yourself speak, which no one likes, then recording can be a really good way, even just to listen to like how you sort of articulate your thoughts. Someone actually asked a good question. They said, do you use a script or is it all spontaneous? So I guess I'll just go back to that point that Paul made before about the outline. And our outline, I guess, to be very clear, I never memorize an entire script as in word for word and then stand on stage and then kind of repeat that verbatim. I never do that myself, because I'm more comfortable when I can sort of improvise just a little bit. But what Paul and I do memorize when we present is we memorize the outline. So we always know what comes next. We also memorize like key jokes, because we've invested a lot in those jokes and we want to make sure that the audience laughs at them. And on more than one occasion, we've messed those jokes up, and it hasn't really been a big deal. But like if a script works for you, then that's fine too. It's just sort of about identifying what works for you and then running with that. And we actually do touch on that a bit more later. So Yeah, there's some really good ideas here. So thanks everyone for
Love
contributing.
in front of the pets sounds great. I hope the pets are really positive with the feedback they're giving. Thanks for your suggestions, everyone.
What do you think of my delivery of that, Lenny? Yeah, so we want to get this point across really clearly. Like, if you're doing an important presentation, think of it like a performance, because in some cases it literally is a performance, and you wouldn't do an important performance without at least one dress rehearsal. So we really think you should apply the same to presenting. So that brings us to part 3 of today, which is present.
Yeah, so this is the one which is what people are most nervous about usually when they think about this whole topic. It's like we've talked about these 2 stages before, and that doesn't generally make people nervous. We think they're related, but if we have a look at our survey results, basically everyone's saying in some fashion that they're unsure, that they're nervous, they're not confident in front of a crowd, they're worried about being up in front of a crowd, maybe delivering it. And, they don't want to be there, maybe it seems, at least half the people who answered our survey. And I suppose, really what we're talking about there is nervousness. But why do we get nervous? And a lot of it is basically coming down to fear. So when we have a look at, when we're breaking them down, we have a fear of failure, fear of going up and doing it wrong, fear of embarrassment, maybe like nobody laughed at your jokes. We've got fear of clown.
Wait, did you put that
fear?
In?
Yeah, that's fear of looking like a clown,
sorry,
Jesse.
Really
fear of looking like a clown. Sorry, everyone. But one thing that we like
could probably make you scared on stage too if you're presenting to a group of clowns.
That's true. That's true. We'll keep it in. What we find weirdly useful is to also look into what are signs of nerves, and why we do this is it's really good to take stock a little bit about how you get nervous. So
let's ask the audience.
So maybe let's chuck in some Canva Lives right now. What do you find you do when you're nervous? So we have a few ideas. Sometimes people talk really quickly. Sometimes people maybe shake in their hands. Hands going cold is a classic one. My hands go frozen when I'm nervous.
Dance a bit.
Thirsty.
Voice
thirsty.
Tremor. Oh, yeah.
Yep. Dry throat. These are all really good
joke.
Things. To tend to repeat words and stutter, red face. These are all pretty common things to hear. And what's really good is to actually identify your own source of nervousness. And so we put down a bunch of ideas here of ones that we could think about when we were nervous or we'd seen people that are nervous. And it's really useful later on, and we'll get into how to manage this, is to figure out what you look like when you're nervous. So I know when I'm nervous, my hands will shake and I'll start fidgeting around the place and I'll not want to sit down. Jesse, how do you get nervous?
I say a lot, like what everyone in here is saying in the chat. And I've said it a bunch during this presentation, but I don't necessarily find to be such a bad thing. It's just if you don't have anything else to say, then only saying is obviously a problem. I also, my voice will often quiver when I'm speaking in front of a large crowd. I think before the presentation, I get a really tight knot in my stomach. I usually sleep badly the night before. But it's just kind of like par for the course when you're presenting. Everybody gets nervous. It's not some sort of exclusive emotion that's reserved for people who are supposedly not natural presenters. It really is something that affects everyone. So let's talk a little bit about signs of confidence, because when you see someone presenting well, you often go away thinking, wow, they were so confident. And there are certain things in what they do that expresses that. So when people speak with a calm and clear voice, rather than speaking really quickly or stuttering, or as we said, saying all the time and nothing else, that sounds pretty confident. Deliberate movement. So when you've got someone who's sort of pacing awkwardly back and forth across the stage for no apparent reason, it looks a little bit clumsy, and compared to someone who might sort of stay still for most of the presentation and only move when that actually corresponds to part of their narrative, like if they're breaking down a process. Having a good stage presence, so that sort of means standing in the right place on stage, not standing in front of the projector, for example, looking out at the audience, kind of holding yourself upright. All of these things exude confidence, even if you don't actually feel confident. So that can be a great way to kind of counter that feeling of nervousness. Paul and I like to think of confidence as being a simple function of the amount of preparation versus how comfortable you're feeling. And we've already talked about preparation. So let's talk about comfort a little bit. So what Paul and I have sort of done when we present is we've identified ways in which we can feel comfortable. To start with, one really good thing to acknowledge, as we've just done, is finding your signs of nervousness and kind of openly acknowledging them. So as we just saw in the chat, people had lots of different signs of nervousness that they have acknowledged. And the important thing here is that, like, if you know how you express that nervousness, then it's not going to be a surprise when it happens. Because there's nothing worse than getting on stage for the first time, speaking and being taken aback by your quivering voice. You're like, what? What a ripoff. I thought I was going to be really confident. Why is my voice quivering? So if you kind of remove that element of surprise, then it's firstly like a lot less destabilizing. And it also means that over time, as you use those opportunities to sort of present more and more, you can actually sort of track them and hope that they go down, because they probably will. And then you can also identify ways to ease the tension. So if you're feeling tense, there are some pretty good ways to ease that tension. For example, we enjoy making jokes. We find that it sort of makes the atmosphere a little bit more relaxed. Some people like using notes or palm cards because that gives them something to fall back on. I usually don't, because I actually prefer to ad lib every now and then. Like we did this important launch last year in New York, and it was probably the most scripted thing I've ever done. And the only time I went off the script was when I referred to a new jacket that I had bought that I was wearing on stage, and just kind of spoke off the cuff. And I felt so much more relaxed as soon as I did that, because people laughed at my ad libbing, and it made me feel like I had a lot less to be nervous about.
Yeah. And the other thing that you can do when you're on stage is to really just use being on stage to kind of maybe help calm you, or at least be ready to be on stage. So we can kind of break that down in a few ways. Like, we always find it better when we're up there to know your stuff. That way, again, if you know your outline so well, you can always recover when something goes wrong, such as getting ready for if maybe your slides don't show up at all. Of course, Jesse's talked about using deliberate movements on stage being really good. It makes you feel confident if you look confident. But my personal one that I do when I notice my nerves ramping up is I get comfortable when I'm in a room talking to my friends. And so I find that the audience is a lot less scary if I can almost make it like I'm in a room talking to my friends. So one of the first things that I do when I'm presenting in front of a crowd is I try to interact with them. And the reason is personally for me, it lowers the stakes. It makes them feel like we're just in a room chatting as friends. So there was an example where I was hosting the company quarterly review, and it was by myself. And I walked up on the stage, and I hadn't been there for that long. And so I'd planned it. I knew that I was going to get nervous, and I knew to make me feel a little better that what I had to do was just work with the crowd. And so I got them all to play some games where they put their hands up, and I toyed with them a little bit. I made them put their hands up and back down and back up and back down, and just did silly things. And it instantly lowered the stakes for me. It made me feel really comfortable. And even in more serious situations, I might just have a bit of a get to know right at the start. So if it's an important chat, it still doesn't mean that I don't get to go, hey, how you doing? How's your day been? Really good to meet you. And so I use that as a way for me to feel more confident. But you can use other things. Maybe just getting up there and speaking confidently will make you feel really confident. And having material that is different to your slides, because then you're going to notice that people are also paying attention to you, and all eyes aren't just locked on the screen. And the other basic tip, if you've ever done a performance before in front of a stage, is to use your posture to your advantage. A lot of people, when they're talking about nerves, talk about maybe a lack of breath or feeling tight across the chest. And you could do some pretty basic things when you get on the stage. Someone mentioned what's called like the magic pause, which is taking a moment. And so you can have a big, deep breath in, breath out, put your shoulders back, put your head back, and you're going to be able to speak more confidently and clearly. And it's just a really simple way to just get that baseline where you're feeling good in front of a stage. But most critically of all is to really identify what makes you feel confident and what you can do to allay that nerves that you have.
So we might just zoom through a couple of these slides. We don't have too much time left, and we do have quite a few more. So we'll obviously need to address the elephant in the room, which is the fact that stages are currently not possible. So when you're using Zoom, a few things to keep in mind. If you're using a script, it's because it's way easier to use one when you're presenting on Zoom. Make sure you don't sound like a robot. So don't just sort of stare at your screen and read if it were a teleprompter, because it's really off-putting for the audience. Mute your notifications, so on your phone and on your computer, so that things don't pop up across your screen and distract you. Make sure to clean up your tabs on your browser, hide your bookmarks, and clean up your desktop, because it's always just a bit distracting if you have to think about your audience, like seeing your own personal computer setup. And always check your camera before you start. Check your virtual background. Make sure that the lighting is all right. Close the doors and windows so that the angle grinder outside of my street doesn't intrude. And then hide self-view if it makes you more comfortable. That literally just means you don't see yourself when you're talking, because that can be distracting as well. It's also just really important to practice presenting as often as possible, as we said at the beginning. So use those little moments as well as the big ones to try to hone this craft. But what about when it goes wrong? Because something always goes wrong. Well, we've actually compiled a little reel of moments in our enterprise launch, which is Canva Enterprise last year, when it didn't quite go to plan. And so I'm just going to play that for you now.
My name is Guy Kawasaki, and I am the Chief Evangelist of Canva. I live in Silicon Valley, California. In my prior life, I'll show you what I did. It's a little dim. I was the Chief Evangelist of Apple. So I've had a long career in Silicon Valley. This is the Macintosh. What is with the dimness here? In my first stint as an evangelist, I was a software evangelist for the Macintosh division. And back then,
and then we started to take increasingly dorky photos. It's going to get worse in a second. Of our team, but our team started to expand. They're buckled into the old way of doing things, and we're going to win and become the dominant online publishing system of the future. And despite the fact that we had built a profitable company and actually demonstrated that we could build a product, here's a note that I wrote to myself at this point in time. I'm actually pretty proud of this note, because I realized I believed in myself, even though I felt a little downtrodden at this point. Mel, you're extremely tired. You're in a challenging situation.
So staying on brand really means remaining consistent with the identity that a company has worked really hard to build. So when we talk about brand and talk about staying on brand, we need to think.
You can also, with Canva for Enterprise, organize all of your content into our super simple storage system, or you can just connect to your cloud storage directly inside the editor. Moving along. You can see there that we've got Dropbox integrated right inside the editor there. Just with one click, you can integrate all of your cloud storage, which is super cool. And some really cool stuff is you can publish anywhere with one click as well, right from inside the editor. So
what I really wanted to show you was just that, and obviously in a very meta way, happened to show you in this presentation as well, that things can go wrong. Like, they can definitely go wrong. But for anyone in the audience, a moment like that is just a blip. Like, people just don't notice it as much as you think they do. So we like to, let me stop showing my computer sound too. We always think it's important to prepare for things to go wrong, accept that they will, and then embrace them when they do. A good quote that I read about not presenting well for any occasion, but daring, is by Brené Brown in her book, Dare to Lead. So she says, "At the heart of daring is a deeply human truth that is rarely acknowledged, especially at work. Courage and fear are not mutually exclusive. Most of us feel brave and afraid at the exact same time." Which is really true of presenting, because you often sort of get up there and you're balancing that excitement and that fear. But they're actually sort of very similar emotions. And so over time, you can learn to channel that fear into the excitement and into that confidence. And I said this for this presentation, important moments are usually pretty scary, because if they weren't scary, they probably wouldn't be that important. So that's also important to keep in mind. So I guess in summary there, you can learn to recognize and master your nerves if you're well prepared, if you practice a bunch, and just by sort of getting as much experience presenting as possible.
Yeah, and we like to also end on this really critical point that was actually a big part of me starting to feel a lot better about presenting. And it kind of feels a bit weird at the start, but most critically, no one cares as much about you as you. And this feels like something your mother wouldn't tell you potentially, but it's a really freeing statement. It basically means that you're going to notice everything that goes wrong, and you're going to remember the feeling that it felt when you like, oh, I missed the exact line I wanted to give, or it didn't. I do.
Your last line at presentations when we do them. Like,
I had a big season opener with everyone there, and we'd planned this brilliant ending. And I said the last line wrong. It didn't flow quite the way we wanted to. And Jesse and I left the stage, and we're like, "Oh no, we've stuffed it." And in the year since then, not a single person had noticed that stuff up. And yeah, except Jesse. And that was really critical, because at the end of the day, it was just us being able to accept those failures and move on and feel okay, because we'd still given a great time because we'd worked so hard on our 3-step process, which kind of comes back to answering Jesse's friend. Why are we qualified to give the presentation? The answer is we're not, but we've just got a 3-step process that we've found is really helpful for us delivering the kinds of presentations that people really have enjoyed in the past. And we hope that by following this kind of procedure, that you're able to feel confident delivering some really great key messages to deliver impacts throughout the world. So yeah, thank you so much for attending today. We hope it's been a bit of fun. I think we've had a lovely time delivering it to you this morning. And as well, make sure to check out all of the other amazing workshops that are underway this week.
I just wanted to wrap up really quickly. Unfortunately, we don't have any time for questions, but before we let you guys go, how good was their presentation? Super engaging, guys. It was awesome content. Thank you. I thought that was very valuable, and a lot of people really, really loved it. So thank you to Jesse and Paul. They're obviously both brilliant presenters. So yeah, we learned a lot today. And thank you all so much for joining us today. I hope that you enjoy the rest of Design for Change Week.
Thanks so much, everyone, for attending. See you soon.